Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and today I want to discuss which of these four classic science fiction books I think might be underrated. This is of course entirely subjective, but the two Goodreads metrics that I'm going to use are number one, the number of ratings, in order to gauge how widely read these books are, and then secondly, the average rating, in order to see how well they were received. As always, you should very much take Goodreads ratings with a grain of salt, as you can't really compare a young adult book to a science fiction book, or a standalone to, say, the fourth book in a series. However, these four books are all sci-fi, they're all classic sci-fi, and they're all standalones, so we're at least somewhat comparing apples to apples. So I'm going to compare these Goodreads metrics to my own personal reading experience, and then let you know what type of readers I think should give them a chance. So let's get started with Earth Abides by George R. Stewart. I received Earth Abides as a gift from a subscriber, Trudy. So Trudy, thank you very much for the thoughtful gift. I really appreciated it. And if you don't know, Earth Abides is a post-apocalyptic story where humanity has almost been entirely wiped out by disease. What follows is less of a thrilling fight for survival and more of a philosophical examination of day-to-day experiences that may shape the future of this post-apocalyptic civilization. Something I found interesting was in what ways this future would be different due to the loss of technology, the loss of infrastructure, and the loss of knowledge, as well as in what ways this society might socially or spiritually repeat events from the past. While I think this book is on the softer end of the sci-fi spectrum, it does include some speculative science, predominantly in regard to the nature of nature in this post-apocalyptic future. So if, for example, humans were impacted by this kind of disease, what would that mean for the ecosystems for plants and insects and other animals? I found these to be rather interesting biological thought experiments, and while they weren't driving large portions of the plot, I did find it to tie in nicely to the themes regarding man's relationship to nature. Another aspect of the novel I enjoyed was the exploration of surviving versus living. What tools and skills are necessary to just see another day versus what pursuits are required in order to nourish one's soul. I found this book to be a slow burn in terms of character development and plot progression, but I found it to be a rather interesting look at the minutiae of day-to-day existence, as well as being rather thematically rewarding when it came to the larger existential questions. I would place this in the subgenre of cozy catastrophes, and if you like the writing style of John Wyndham, I think there's a pretty good chance you might enjoy this one too. For me, Earth Abides was an 8 out of 10. So how does that compare to Goodreads? For context, the way I think of sci-fi books on Goodreads, very roughly, is that anything with under 1,000 ratings is relatively unknown, between 1 and 10,000 is lesser known, between 10 and 50,000 is moderately well known, 50 to 100,000 as well known, and over 100,000 as famous. Earth Abides currently has just over 29,000 ratings with an average rating of 3.95. To me, this is roughly about what I would expect, so I'm going to say it's fairly rated. If you are someone that enjoys slower-paced, thought-provoking books, then Earth Abides might be for you, but knowing there's some more plot and character-focused readers out there, it might not necessarily hit for everyone. Okay, moving on to our second book for today's video, we have Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said by Philip K. Dick. Flow My Tears follows a famous television show host, James Taverner, and one day he wakes up and suddenly no one recognizes him anymore. In fact, there doesn't seem to be any record of him at all. Flow My Tears combines some of my favorite aspects of PKD's writing, including a surreal world with mysteries for both the characters and readers to try to unravel in terms of both the nature of reality and truth. This book has a dark and grungy tone, and of the PKD books I've read so far, it reminded me the most of A Scanner Darkly. It is also set in a world with an overtly militant police state, so if you are intrigued by the themes regarding law enforcement in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and A Scanner Darkly, then this might be something that you might enjoy diving into in Flow My Tears. I think some of the book's themes are explored more explicitly in this book than in other PKD books that I've read. I think this exposition might not be to everyone's taste, but there were some conversations between characters that I found to be rather impactful. In particular, there was a discussion between two characters about the nature of grief that I really resonated with. An aspect of PKD's writing that I've said can be underrated is how funny he can be. However, Flow My Tears isn't overly comedic. If you're looking for a darker book of his to try, then this might be the one for you. Personally, I found the lighter moments in A Scanner Darkly really heightened the impact of the darkness, whereas this to me felt like a more consistently heavy read. Something I struggled with in the book was the lack of anything to root for. I didn't really connect to any of the characters, and I quite strongly disliked Taverner. I think that unlikable characters such as Alex in A Clockwork Orange can work because his personality is directly linked to the thematic explorations of that book, whereas in Flow My Tears, I struggled to find the specific payoff for taking this journey through the eyes of this particular character. Overall, I think this was an interesting exploration of a number of ideas, including drugs and genetics and relationships, but for me it was a book where I was emotionally connected to some parts more than others. So I gave Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said a 7.5 out of 10. So does that mean I think it's underrated or overrated? On Goodreads, it currently has just over 40,000 ratings with a 3.91 average. For comparison to some of his other works, this is the 5th most read PKD book. That makes sense to me as I enjoyed it and I recommend it, but for me, I would put it in my second tier for PKD books, and I would say that it is fairly rated. If you are looking for an underrated PKD book, then I would have to recommend The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, as I thought that book was fantastic and more people should give it a try. Moving on to our third book for today, we have Blood Music by Greg Bear. In Blood Music, scientist Virgil Ulam makes a groundbreaking discovery. But when his company decides to shut down his extracurricular research, he decides to sneak out his lab work with him. The first half of Blood Music feels like a Michael Crichton techno-thriller. The lab scenes reminded me of Jurassic Park, where I was thinking, this sounds cool. Can't wait to see how it goes horribly wrong. The second half of the book is less plot-driven and more conceptual. If you're looking for page-turning plot development, then this might not be the best book for you. But if you like authors that take real scientific theories and then expand them into ambitious concepts, then you might connect with Blood Music. The second half of the book reminded me more of Arthur C. Clarke, and there are a few moments where I just had to stop while reading it in order to try and process the unique concepts. The book is on the harder end of the sci-fi spectrum, but I still found it to be quite readable. Bear's prose is a little bit dry, but every now and again he would surprise me with an unexpected turn of phrase. My only minor complaint about this book is that the second half introduces 3 perspectives, one of which I loved, one of which I liked, and one of which I felt didn't add much to the story. But ultimately, this is a book where the main focus was on the ideas, and I found them to be incredibly thought-provoking. I'll be thinking about this book for quite a long time. I gave Blood Music a 9 out of 10. So how does that compare to Goodreads? Blood Music currently has a little over 14,000 ratings with an average of 3.84. This book has fewer ratings than any of the other books in today's video, and in a way that makes sense to me because I think the particular style will appeal to specific readers more than others. But I think it's great, and I'm going to say that Blood Music is underrated. If you like Crichton and/or Clarke, then I think it's worth giving it a try. And speaking of Clarke, the final book for today's video is The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. The City and the Stars takes place in a city called Diaspar over 1 billion years from now. Right off the bat, Arthur C. Clarke tackles 2 interesting questions. What would a city look like 1 billion years from now, and how has a city even lasted that long? The first 50 pages or so are some truly brilliant world building and really pushes the boundaries of human imagination. Just a few examples of some of the details I enjoyed included the hyperreal simulation games, the nature of the building materials, and I won't say exactly what they do, but the role of the character called the Jester was something that I found to be both clever and entertaining. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether this is a utopia or a dystopia, but the main character follows a classic dystopian novel story arc of trying to uncover the real truth behind the history of Diaspar. I was invested in this story arc, but the plot felt a little more tropey and less creative than the world building. As with any Clarke book, you're going to get a bunch of cool ideas, and I felt like the way that these were tied into the story sometimes was rather clever, and sometimes just felt a little bit convoluted. Overall, I found this an impressive speculative book, especially considering it was written in 1956. I did feel like it peaked in the first act, but it was still an enjoyable read. For me, The City and the Stars was an 8 out of 10. So, how does this compare to the Goodreads metrics? The City and the Stars currently has a bit over 33,000 ratings with an average of 4.08. If we compare this to other Clarke books, it is his 5th most read book and is rated just a little bit lower than some of his famous works. Personally, I would have it just a little bit lower than Childhood's End and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and on a similar level to Rendezvous with Rama, so I think it's fairly rated. So there you go, I recommend picking up all 4 of these books, but I want to give a little bit of extra love to Blood Music by Greg Bear. Let me know if you've read any of these and whether you think they're underrated or overrated. Something that's not overrated, hitting that subscribe button. And if you're enjoying the channel, check out the perks of becoming a Patreon member, where you can become one of my robots, androids, or cyborgs like Nima and New Eden, Half Ogre, Zakawe, and currently experiencing side effects Colin. And you can find more sci-fi content over here.